Yeah, hi. This is the video for writing your thesis statement, 2.7, step 2. Men, we reaped higher level essay. Let's do this. A good thesis statement for the higher level essay will make a claim. A claim is a debatable argument, something that somebody could take an opposing viewpoint on. It's interpretive. It is not basic. It's pretty thought-provoking. It's pretty complex. It makes people scratch their heads and say, hey, that's interesting, and I'm not sure if I agree with it. Okay? This debatable claim is about the line of inquiry you've written, and it needs to include authorial choices, of course, and a connection to theme and meaning. So I use these three colors to kind of differentiate these three pieces that need to be in your thesis statement. Check it out. First of all, let's remind ourselves what themes we were looking at as we read this. Now, you don't have to use one of these themes, but I think if you do use one of these themes, you'll have a successful essay. So that's all I'm going to say there. The power of creating a new narrative. Ward writes this story in order to take in her hands her journey to some kind of understanding, some kind of healing after these terrible traumas. Journey to freedom and understanding after trauma, well, yeah, it is through the writing of her narrative, but there are other things that she learns as she takes this journey to freedom and understanding. She learns some of the reasons why this epidemic happened. She learns that some people who seemed like victims were actually the heroes of the story. She learned some of the differences between men and women in her community. And maybe most importantly, she learned that she doesn't have to be guilty. She doesn't have to feel guilty. She's not responsible for these deaths. The collective over the individual is an important theme in the book, and certainly it is through the collective. I'm not sure where I lost you, but I think it was at the collective over the individual. The collective over the individual is an important theme in the book. It is only through the telling of her community's story that Ward is able to find any kind of closure or recovery or ability to move on. She can't just tell her story or her brother's story, but she tells these 5 stories of the men she lost. And she goes back in time to tell of other men who were lost before that. And she also includes the women who have been left behind. So it's an entire community's grieving and processing that she retells. And so that is much more important than the individual story. Finally, identity as choice, rejecting the lie. She writes a lot about finding her identity as someone beyond a victim, beyond someone who doesn't matter, who is nothing, beyond the stereotype, beyond the racist butt of a joke, and beyond just the mirror reflection of her parents. But then she also talks about the identities of these 5 specific men and how they move beyond the stereotypes of thug or juvenile delinquent, and how they're much more complex and complicated than that. All right, moving on. Here are some sample Frederick Douglass essays. The first one is the one that I've read to you more than once, but I just wanted to show you now with these 3 pieces. Here's the green is for authorial choice. The blue is for a debatable claim that answers the line of inquiry, and the pink is for theme and meaning. All right, so we've got all 3 in that one. And here's another example, and you can see that this one looks quite different, but it does have these 3 pieces in it as well. All right, here is what we want to avoid. You want to avoid a descriptive essay. And I read a lot of these, and I told you in the comments that you had an essay that mostly describes. If that was the case, typically it did not score higher than a 2 in criterion B. So here is one thing to avoid. This planning is setting up a descriptive essay. Here's their line of inquiry. How does Ward use her memory, stories she has heard, and imagination to tell her story? And the thesis statement is, in the memoir, Ward explains the characteristics and her relation to each of the 5 men growing up and what eventually led to their deaths through her use of memory, stories, and imagination. Well, that is a concise thesis statement, but what it's doing is it's setting up a descriptive essay where you go on to describe different memories, different stories, her imagination and how it plays a role, rather than focusing on an authorial choice and how specifically that authorial choice creates meaning. So let me show you what to do. This is what not to do. This is what to do. So again, same line of inquiry. How does Ward use her memory, stories she has heard, and imagination to tell her story? Okay, here is setting up now an essay that is going to be a literary analysis. In the memoir, Ward creates a whole portrait of a community grieving intergenerational trauma. There's making an interesting, arguable, debatable claim through the use of not only her personal memories, but stories told by others in her community, as well as hypothetical scenarios that she creates by merging the two. It is through this communal collection of experiences that she and her community are able to survive the tragedies. So we've got the green is authorial choices, and this student has personal memories, stories told by others, and hypothetical scenarios included. And then to get to meaning, this has to do with the collective over the individual, right? Communal collection of experiences. It helps them to survive. All right, so you've got a couple, or a good example here. I also have the sample that I did in my first video, and that is in my my sample 2.7 that responds to this line of inquiry I made. How does Ward use the motif of ghost specters to make a point of recovering after trauma? And there's my thesis statement. I've got the ghost motif, the authorial choice. A lot of blue in this one, so I spent a lot of time trying to make my debatable claim. And then the meaning here is how she recovers from the pull towards death. Ward uses the ghost motif in Men We Reap to recreate the haunting ache of the dead men she and her community have lost and the inexorable pull their loss has created to the other side. She recovers from this pull toward death. There's the journey, right, after trauma, only through imagining her own death someday as a happy reunion with her brother. And so I'm capitalizing on that very last paragraph of the book, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that in this essay. All right, so here's an example. Here's how to do your thesis statement. Good luck to you as you write yours.